Number 10. Joan Rish. Joan Rish was an American housewife who disappeared from her home in Lincoln, Massachusetts on October 24th, 1961. Her disappearance remains one of the most puzzling and mysterious cases in American history. Joan was married to Martin Rish and they had 2 children, Lillian and David. In April of 1961, they moved to Lincoln, but later that year, everything would change. On the day of her disappearance, neighbors reported hearing strange noises and the sound of a car horn repeatedly honking around mid-morning. But what happened that day? On the morning of October 24th, Martin left for a work trip, departing at around 8 a.m. to catch his flight. Joan left her son with her neighbor, Barbara, and took Lillian to a dentist appointment. She came back home and picked up her son and made lunch for the kids. Joan changed her outfit and put David down for a nap. At around 1 p.m., Barbara came over and brought her son so he could play with Lillian for a little while. The children saw Joan go in and out of the garage, taking care of some plants. Shortly before 2 p.m., Joan took the children to Barbara's house and said she would be back. About 15 minutes later, Barbara says she saw Joan carrying something red in her outstretched arms into the garage while wearing a trench coat. Barbara then took Lillian back home at 3:40 p.m., and she assumed Joan was still there, so she left Lillian and said goodbye. When she got back from the shopping trip, she said Lillian came running over to her house, saying, "Mommy's gone and the kitchen is covered with red paint." Her brother was alone crying in his crib, and Joan was nowhere to be found. When Barbara went over to the house, she saw the kitchen covered with blood. She called the police at 4:33 p.m. The police arrived shortly after. Sergeant Mike McHugh noted blood on the floor and walls in the kitchen. The phone was ripped from the wall and dumped in the garbage can. Chairs were overturned and the table was flipped. There were clear signs of a struggle. A trail of blood led from the kitchen out into the driveway and straight to Joan's car. The trench coat was in the house, and so was her purse. There were no bloody footprints, and nobody had seen anyone enter the home, which was strange with all the coming and going the children were doing. Someone should have seen something. There were possible later sightings that were unconfirmed. Some witnesses said there was a woman matching Joan's description at 2:45 p.m. wearing a coat and a kerchief on her head, walking by the side of the road. At around 3:30, there was a woman who looked disoriented with blood running down her legs, walking along another road. The whole thing was very suspicious, which led many to speculate that Joan staged the attack to run away and start a new life. A reporter with the local newspaper went to the library and discovered that Joan had checked out over 25 books, all related to murder and missing persons cases. And the month right before her disappearance, she had checked out a book about a woman who went missing, who also left behind overturned furniture and blood smears. With nothing else to go on, the case went cold. It was very strange that she had spent the day with her children, going to the dentist and then back and forth to the neighbors, to just disappear. Some of her friends believed she was dead, while other investigators believe that she planned her disappearance to escape an unsatisfying life. For the past 60 years, nobody has come forward with any information regarding what happened to Joan Rish, and now all the original investigators on the case have all passed away. The case remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in the United States. And now for number 9. But first, I want to give a big thank you to Daffyd Hat and Matt Leonard for supporting this channel. Thanks so much for letting us be a part of your day. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe for more videos about strange and mysterious disappearances. Number 9. Sonia Phillip. It's been 2 decades since Sonia Phillip vanished in New York City. On September 10, 2001, Sonia was 31 years old. She was a successful doctor who spent that day repotting orchids and chatting with her mom on Instant Messenger. Later that afternoon, she went shopping in a department store and bought some lingerie. This was all captured on security camera footage. But that was the last time anybody saw her. According to some rumors, she used the chaos of what happened the next day to flee from her life and start a new one. But others think she was killed during the attack on the World Trade Center and that her body was never found. There are even people out there who think someone used 9/11 as a cover to murder the young doctor. Sonia's husband, Ron Lieberman, was alarmed on the morning of September 11th when he couldn't find his wife. But then he heard news of the plane that struck the North Tower only 2 blocks from their apartment. It was presumed that she was one of the victims. And as a doctor, her family guessed that she had seen what was happening at Ground Zero and rushed to help the injured people, even as the buildings collapsed. But when police looked deeper at Sonia's story, they became suspicious. It turned out the doctor had been suffering from alcohol issues. She was recently suspended from her job at Staten Island's St. Vincent's Medical Center, and she was suffering from marital problems. There were rumors that she'd been ditching her husband to meet women in lesbian bars. There were also some legal issues because of a false complaint against one of her colleagues, which resulted in a night in jail. In 2004, Sonia Phillip was removed from the list of 9/11 victims, only to be reinstated after a court battle fought by her family in 2008. She was officially killed, as far as the law is concerned, in the 9/11 attack. But what really happened to Sonia Phillip is unknown, as her body was never recovered. Her family and friends continue to seek closure and hope for answers about her disappearance. Number 8. Pisces III submersible. In 1973, there was an epic underwater rescue mission when the Canadian submarine Pisces III sank. This submersible was conducting a routine mission to lay sea cable, but as it was being pulled to the surface by its mothership, the rear compartment hatch was unintentionally ripped open. The rear of the craft was fully flooded, causing the submersible to plummet to the bottom of the ocean. It sank to an astounding depth of 1,575 feet. As a result, the two people in the cockpit of the submarine only had 72 hours of oxygen left before they faced certain death. Luckily, the crew members inside were professionals. Both had served in the British Navy, and they still had access to communications. They weren't in any trouble of losing contact with the outside world, but it wasn't like they could give an exact position for where they were, sitting in the pitch-black depths of the sea. Immediately upon the disaster, a rescue mission was launched. For 3 days, the world was captivated by the intensity of the mission. Very similar to the recent search for the Titan, rescuers radioed down to pilot Roger Chapman and senior pilot Roger Mallinson, telling them to refrain from moving or speaking. They needed to stretch their oxygen availability as much as possible, and by not moving at all, they were able to sit almost completely still and gain an extra 12 hours of air. The mission was a success, but just barely. By the time researchers finally found the missing submersible at the bottom of the ocean on September 1st, the pilots were on the verge of death. When Pisces III finally broke the surface of the ocean and the two men were released, they only had 12 minutes of oxygen remaining. If the rescue mission had started only 15 minutes later, both of them would have died. Every last second counted toward getting them out of the submersible still breathing, and if they hadn't sat completely still and refrained from talking, they also would have died. To this day, the rescue of Roger Chapman and Roger Mallinson remains the deepest successful rescue ever completed. Number 7. The Beaumont Children. On a hot summer day in 1966, the Beaumont Children spent the day on the beach in South Australia. However, they never returned home and were never seen again. The disappearance of the Beaumont Children is still one of the most famous and horrifying unsolved cases of Australia. The details of the family are easy to find. The Beaumonts lived in Adelaide, in a wealthy beachside suburb. Jim was a taxi driver, and he and his wife Nancy had 3 children. There was 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Arna, and 4-year-old Grant. Together, they were one happy family. They lived relatively close to the beach, so the kids often spent the day in the sand by themselves. It was also the 1960s, when parents weren't particularly worried about their kids being kidnapped. Nancy even gave the children money for bus fare and a small lunch, and she told them to be home by the early afternoon. By 3:00 p.m., the kids still hadn't returned, and the family was very worried. They searched the beach and drove around the suburbs, but there was no sign of the kids. And when things seemed hopeless, they went straight to the police station. The cops organized a search party immediately, and the whole area was scoured top to bottom, but the children were nowhere to be found, and it began to look like something sinister had happened. If the children had been swept out to sea, they would have left some of their items behind, but out of the 17 things the children had brought with them that day, not a single one was found anywhere. This suggested that the kids and all of their belongings had been taken by somebody. Police soon learned that at 11 a.m. an eyewitness saw a strange man in his 30s join the children on the beach, but the witness hadn't thought anything of it at the time because they all seemed to be getting along. The witness didn't realize the man was a total stranger, though. She described him as 6 feet tall, blonde, and slim. He was also wearing a blue Speedo, and the witness claimed that he left with the children after they packed up their stuff. And things only got worse for the family when 2 other witnesses came forward saying they also saw the children with a tall blonde man wearing a Speedo. The police theorized that whoever the mysterious man was, he must have been familiar with the Beaumonts. The kids weren't acting frightened or nervous, and it was as if they knew the person already. Nobody was ever arrested in connection with the case. A man named Harry Phipps became a suspect in 2013, but he was never charged with anything. Harry came to the attention of the authorities when his son came forward to say he'd seen his father with the children that day in 1966, and others claimed that Harry had paid some workers to dig a hole in his factory yard around the same time the children vanished. But when police dug up the yard using excavators, they never found anything. Number 6. Theodosia Burr. Aaron Burr was the third vice president of the United States of America from 1801 to 1805. His daughter was Theodosia Burr, a woman who went missing 8 years after Aaron's fateful duel with Alexander Hamilton. On December 31, 1812, Theodosia got into a schooner named the Patriot in Georgetown, South Carolina. At the time, she was 29 years old and was on her way to visit her dad. The journey should have been simple, with the schooner traveling up the Atlantic coast to New York City, but the boat never showed up. It disappeared at some point between South Carolina and New York State, and Theodosia was never seen again. Aaron Burr walked the streets of New York the rest of his life, according to his biography, as the hollow shell of a man. It's been over 200 years and the fate of Theodosia Burr is still unknown. It's unclear if she sank in a storm or if the boat was captured by pirates. Most historians think a storm is the most likely cause of her disappearance, but there is no way to know for sure. What do you think happened to the Patriot, the ship Aaron Burr's daughter Theodosia vanished on? Tell me your theories in the comments, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Now, on to number 5. Number 5. Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is considered by many to be the best-selling novelist of all time. She was the brilliant mastermind behind 66 detective novels, and she also penned 14 short stories. Over 2 billion copies of her books have been sold worldwide, and that makes Christie the third most popular author of all time, after William Shakespeare and the Bible. She even composed the longest-running play in history, The Mousetrap. Any Agatha Christie fans out there? I love the TV adaptations of Agatha Christie's Poirot. In 1926, Agatha Christie disappeared into thin air. The most popular writer in the world vanished, sparking a nationwide search. She was feared dead, or worse, kidnapped and being tortured. Her family was distraught, and the public was absolutely terrified. But 11 days after her abandoned car was discovered stuck in some bushes near a quarry, Agatha was found alive at the Old Swan Hotel in Harrogate, England. Somebody recognized the author as she was checking in, but they were confused because she'd purchased a room under the name Teresa Neal. And what's even more strange is that she also claimed to be from South Africa. When her husband Archie, whom some had suspected was behind her murder, arrived at the hotel, Agatha claimed not to know who he was. She had amnesia and couldn't remember anything about her life. The amnesia eventually went away, and Agatha returned to normal, but she divorced her husband in 1930 and married an archaeologist almost 15 years younger. Nobody knows why she vanished for those 11 days in 1926, although some believe she crashed her car and really did get amnesia. Others think it was just a ploy to sell more books. The most likely reason, though, is that Agatha Christie had a huge fight with her husband and may have had some type of mental breakdown. Number 4. Crystal Rogers. In 2015, Crystal Rogers vanished mysteriously in Bardstown, Kentucky. In July 2023, the FBI re-upped their vow to solve the unsettling disappearance of the young mother, even though it happened 8 years prior. Investigators in Louisville said at the beginning of July that they've made significant progress throughout the last year. They also said that the main suspect at the moment is Brooks Houck, Crystal's boyfriend at the time she vanished. The incident took place at some point between July 3rd and July 5th, 2015. On July 5th, Crystal's father discovered her keys, her purse, and her uncharged cell phone inside her sedan. The vehicle was found parked on the side of the Bluegrass Parkway with a flat tire, but how it got there and where Crystal went is what the FBI seem unable to answer. The last time anyone saw Crystal alive was on July 3rd. One of her friends saw Crystal walking out of a Walmart in the afternoon, and during their brief conversation, Crystal said she was going to be hanging out with her boyfriend, whom she lived with, that night. So that's normal. When the police questioned Brooks, he said Crystal was with him when they went to bed on July 3rd. It was a normal night and he fell asleep while she was playing on her phone. But when he got up the next day, Crystal was gone and her car was no longer in the driveway. It wasn't that unusual, but then nobody ever saw Crystal again. Although Brooks is the main suspect, there is no evidence tying him to Crystal's disappearance. He hasn't been arrested, and the police have made little headway in proving his involvement in the case. Crystal Rogers is still out there somewhere, either dead or alive. The one thing the police have said is that some people in Bardstown have information on what happened, but are refusing to come forward. And that's pretty shocking considering there is a $100,000 reward currently offered for any information leading to Crystal's discovery. Number 3. Louis Laprince. Louis Laprince, often referred to as the father of cinematography, was declared dead in 1897, just 1 month before he was set to unveil his latest creation to the world. This invention was the first functional model of a device capable of capturing motion, essentially the earliest version of a video camera. However, due to his untimely death, Thomas Edison received credit for inventing the first usable equipment for capturing moving images. Born in 1841 in France, Louis came from a family with a military background, as his father held the rank of major in the French army. He studied painting and chemistry, and after school he moved to England. Louis married Elizabeth Whitley in 1869, and together they established a school of applied art called the Leeds Technical School of Art. In the 1880s, he created a 16-lens camera and applied for a patent. His inventions kept on coming, but then, in September of 1890, just as Louis was preparing to visit America to unveil his latest work, he disappeared. On September 16th, he traveled by train to Paris. His brother met him at the station, but where Louis went after and what happened to him is a mystery that's never been solved. There was an extensive search to discover the missing inventor. The French police were involved, and so was Scotland Yard, but even after 7 years, there were no clues or leads. So, in 1897, Louis Laprince was officially declared dead. A lot of theories have been proposed as to what happened in the years since. One of the most popular theories, considered a conspiracy theory, is that Louis was assassinated. It's believed that Thomas Edison or one of Edison's associates murdered Louis. It may have been part of the patent war, with Louis being killed because his new device would have ruined Edison's career. Another theory is that Louis was killed by his own family because he was ousted as gay. That's never been proven though, but then again, neither have any of the other theories. In 1890, a drowned man was pulled from France's River Seine, but unfortunately he was never identified. Maybe it was Louis, but there is really no way to know for sure. Number 2. Rudy Farias. On March 6, 2015, Rudy Farias disappeared while walking his dogs in northwest Houston. He was just 17 years old at the time. His mother became extremely concerned when the dog suddenly showed up at the home without the teenage boy. 8 years later, on July 2, 2023, Rudy Farias was discovered alive. But what in the world happened to him during his absence? And where has he been for nearly the last decade? According to Rudy's mother, who spoke to news outlets over the phone, he was discovered riddled with cuts and bruises. Rudy was also found with blood in his hair, evidence pointing to extreme abuse. He was found sitting outside a church unresponsive, and somebody called 911. Rudy was then taken to a hospital to be treated. That's what Rudy's mother said when this story first broke, but it was all lies. As of July 12th, Rudy has sat down for an interview to divulge what really happened over the last 8 years. It turns out that Rudy was never missing at all. The day after he vanished, he returned home, but his mother lied to the police by claiming he was still missing. The shocking truth is that Rudy never left his house from between 17 and 25 years old. Rudy revealed to the authorities that his mother had brainwashed him into staying indoors. Rudy said it was like living in a prison. He had the option to leave, but his mother manipulated him into being too afraid to walk outside. Rudy said that whenever family members or his old friends would come over, he had to hide and pretend like he wasn't there. Then there's the shocking revelation of the abuse. Rudy said that his mother never physically forced herself onto him, but she did coerce him into doing things that made him extremely uncomfortable. But for now, the police have declined to charge the mother with any wrongdoing. Rudy appears to be physically healthy, but he's requested to be removed from his mother's care, to never see her again. Rudy also said that since he's been out of the house, it feels like he's finally at peace. Number 1. The Thomas Hume. In the 17th century, Le Griffon was the first known ship to travel the upper Great Lakes. However, it was wrecked during a storm on Lake Michigan, and in the centuries that followed, between 6,000 and 8,000 ships followed its fate by sinking to the bottom of the Great Lakes. Historians have estimated around 30,000 people have died from being shipwrecked in the Great Lakes over the past 400 years or so, and one of the ships that vanished was the Thomas Hume. The Thomas Hume was a schooner that was built in Wisconsin in the late 1800s. In 1876, the ship was sold to Captain Welch out of Chicago. Then it changed hands to Charles Hackley, who refitted the vessel for transporting lumber. The schooner traveled across Lake Michigan from Muskegon to Chicago up until 1891, when it disappeared on May 21st. The ship was last seen leaving the harbor in Chicago after unloading its cargo of lumber. It had a small crew of only 7 and sailed away from the city into a rapidly developing storm. The ship failed to arrive in Muskegon, so Charles Hackley and his partner Thomas Hume, after whom the ship was named, sent Captain Seth Lee to look for the vessel, but the captain never found a single piece of the wreckage. Usually, if a ship was destroyed in a storm, there'd at least be some pieces of it floating on the surface. All 7 crew members were presumed dead, and the ship and its cargo resulted in a loss of $6,000. That amount may not seem like a lot today, but it was a huge amount of money back then. The reason the disappearance of the ship became so famous is that a lot of people believed it never really vanished. There were rumors that the crew stole the cargo and repainted the ship. Then they sold everything for themselves. Another rumor was that the vessel was hit by a much larger freighter, killing everyone on board. The captain of the larger freighter then swore his crew to secrecy. One of the spookier rumors, though, claimed that the ship was swallowed into oblivion, just like the countless vessels lost in the Bermuda Triangle. But none of these turned out to be true. In 2006, divers discovered the intact Thomas Hume at the bottom of the lake. They found the ship in almost pristine condition. Researchers are still trying to figure out how it sank, seeing as it looks perfectly fine. It's almost like the ship dropped to the bottom of the ocean like a stone for no reason. Thanks for watching. Which case did you find the most mysterious? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and give this video a thumbs up for more. See you in the next one!